Hola a todos, bienvenidos a la esquina española. We are here, we are going live, and we are going to talk about la comida. Specifically, la comida de España, the food from Spain, and la comida de Mexico, la comida mexicana, Mexican food. So let's get started. We have about 2 minutes before we are officially going to be live to allow people to kind of get in from their other classes, get in to learn. So let's see where everyone is at. We're going to allow for 2 more minutes. While we are doing that, I hope everyone is practicing their español at home. Today, we've got some very important palabras that I'd like you to know, some very important vocab words. So the first one is la comida. Everybody say la comida. Good. La comida means food. It's a feminine noun. And anytime we describe it, if we use adjectives, we also have to make sure that they are feminine. So we could be saying la comida mexicana, Mexican food, and la comida española, Spanish food. Very good. So today, 1 more minute. Like I said before I really jump in, we're going to talk about the food from Spain and the food from Mexico. La comida is the first vocab word that we need to know. We also need to know the vocab word el país. El país is a masculine noun in Spanish and it means country. So today we are talking about dos países, España y Mexico. We also need to know the word la influencia. It sounds a lot like what it means in English. La influencia is influence. And this is really important because the two countries we talk about, they have a connected history and they also have completely separate histories. And that really impacts their food. That really impacts their comida. The last one is el sabor. Sabor means flavor. And flavor is a really important word, obviously, when we're talking about la comida. So let's jump in. Bienvenidos todos. Welcome to La Esquina Española. Yo soy Profe Tyner. Hopefully you are all here because you are in 6th grade and you are excited to learn about la comida de España y la comida de Mexico. So we're going to get started with la comida de España, which is here in el azul, in the blue. And we're going to start with what their main sources of proteína, their main sources of protein are. You might be surprised to learn that beef is not a huge source of protein in Spain. Their main source of protein is actually jamón. Jamón, aquí, means ham, sounds just like it. Jamón. And Spaniards eat ham in a variety of ways. Often they actually dry it and keep it almost like a prosciutto or salami, if you guys have had that before. And their version is called jamón ibérico. Ibérico refers to the idea that Spain is on the Iberian Peninsula. Wonderful. So jamón ibérico. Why do Spaniards eat this meat or this ham in a dried form? That would be due to their history. Spain has been a country for much longer than we have invented refrigerators. So they had to figure out a way to keep their meat and their protein sources to last. And one way to do this is to dry it baked in salt. So that would let the bugs or any bacteria that could make you sick die, but keep the meat edible. So that is one way we have jamón. And in fact, jamón in this dried out form is what gives Spaniards the tradition of tapas. We're going to talk about tapas a little bit later, but I want you to keep that in mind. Another source of proteína from Spain is marisco, and marisco means shellfish. So Spain has 2 very large coasts. They have a coast in the north on the Atlantic Ocean, and they have a coast on the southeast that borders the Mediterranean Sea. And the Mediterranean Sea is a very healthy sea. It's got lots of seafood. So many traditional Spanish foods have mariscos, which are shellfish. Many traditional Spanish foods also have pez, which are fish. And this makes a lot of sense, right? If you think about the terrain and the geography of any país, of any country, that usually is a great influencia in what they eat. So Spain has land that is fit for raising pigs, is fit for raising pork or pigs and ham. That's why they have so much jamon. And they also have two huge coastlines that are very rocky, which is where mariscos like to live, and fish. In terms of grains, so I know in your health class, you probably have talked about the food pyramid, and grains or carbohydrates are one of the bottom parts of our food pyramid, right? People have been eating this way for a very long time. And in terms of grains, Spaniards have rice, arroz, and they also have wheat, harina. Now, the arroz that they have, I actually have some here. This is traditional paella rice, and their rice is not the rice that we think of that might come with Asian foods. It's not this long grain rice. It's actually a very, very short rice, and I can get an open bag of this a little bit later and show you guys that it's a very short grain rice, and they use it to make a traditional dish called paella. Paella, some of you may have had as your project. It is a dish that has rice baked with shellfish and sausage made from pork. They also are big fans of aceite. Now, this is one area we're really going to focus in today's lesson. Aceite, right here, aceite means oil, and it's specifically cooking oil. So the main oil that Spaniards have is aceite de oliva or aceite de aceituna, which is not tuna, but olive oil. And I have a really fancy bottle here of olive oil. Now, olive oil has a really mild flavor. So most of the sabores, the flavors in Spanish cooking, all start from olive oil. And that's because their climate, their clima, allows for olive trees to grow all over the place. Spain is the number one producer of aceite de oliva in the whole world. They produce more olive oil than any other country. That includes Italy, which is a bigger country and might be more well known for their olive oil. It includes Greece. They are actually the world's largest producer of olive oil. And almost every recipe for Spanish cooking from Spain, from España, starts with aceite. So this is really important. And part of the history of why aceite is so important in la comida de España is because Spain was actually ruled by Arabic tribes for almost 800 years. Okay, so that's a really long time. The United States has been a country for only like 270 years. Spain was ruled by the Arabs, which are people from the Middle East, for over 700 years. And this really affected their cooking. So the biggest influencia in all of the food of España is actually the Arabic culture. And they brought oil with them. Now the Romans used oil too. So oil was all over ancient Rome and the Middle East. Northern Europe tends to use butter, mantequilla, but in Spain and below, they tend to use olive oil. They also have flavors like paprika, which is called pimentón, and it's smoked. So if I open this up, if I can, I always struggle with this. It's very dark red, and this is one of the flavors that you get really strong in Spanish cooking. It's very smoky, but it's not spicy at all. It's almost sweet. Another flavor that you get is azafrán or saffron. Now, saffron is one of the only spices in the world that has to be picked by hand, and it is found almost exclusively in Middle Eastern, Eastern African, and Spanish cooking. And once again, that's because the empires of the ancient Arabs extended all the way into Spain. This is one of the only spices in the world, like I said, that has to be picked by hand. And even though it's red, I can take some out and show you. Even though the little threads are red, they come from the inside of a flower. And even though they're red, they give food a yellow color. And it was actually said once upon a time that azafran or saffron was worth more than gold. And it gave food that golden color. It was awesome. So let's think about the sabores de España, the flavors of Spain. Even though we who are from Los Angeles, when we think of Spanish food, we might actually be thinking of Mexican food. So we think of spicy, we think of limes and acid. Spanish food does not have that. Spanish food is very mild. It is very rich. They tend to cook with a lot of oils. And they also and a lot of mild spices like azafran and pimentón. And it is very salado and fresco. So we have rico, salado, y fresco. Rico means rich, and that's because they're cooking with this delicious fatty oil right here. And it also is because they're using foods that are high in fat, like jamon and certain fish. Okay? It's also salado. Back to that jamon. The jamon is stored in salt as it dries, and so this provides a really salty flavor that Spaniards tend to love. A lot of their foods have a nice balance of salt, sal, and it's also fresco. They love to use fresh ingredients in Spain as fresh as they can. Their climate is very similar to Northern California, so they're able to grow a lot of fruits and vegetables that are considered mild. So, manzanas, apples, lots of leafy greens, and these show up in Spanish cooking. Now, apart from just la comida, we have to talk about la manera de comer, how Spanish people eat. So, how Spanish people eat, we've talked about it in class before. In Spain, the tradition is to wake up kind of late. So many Americans start our days at 6 a.m., 5 a.m., but Spaniards tend to start their days kind of closer to 7 or 8, and they don't really start work till 9. So their desayunos, their breakfasts, tend to be very pequeño or chico, which are small. They tend to have churros con chocolate or una media luna, a croissant, or some other form of pan. They do eat lots of bread in its traditional European form in España. Okay? Then they work and they don't get a lunch break until about 2 p.m. So they get a lunch break and they also take a siesta. And their lunch usually is also very light. It might be un bocadillo, a sandwich. It might be jamon, a little bit of jamon, or some mariscos, and some fresh vegetables. Okay, and then they take a nap, and most Spaniards do not eat dinner until 8 or 10. Okay, I see some of you guys are leaving. I hope you are staying for this lesson. Most Spaniards do not eat dinner. Most personas de España or españoles do not eat dinner until 8, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10, 10:30 p.m. in the night. And that's when they have their biggest meal. So that might be their paella with all their arroz. It might be other forms of dinner like a meal with fish. They tend to eat a lot of things from el mar, from the sea. They might eat pulpo, which is octopus or squid, and they usually have it with arroz or pan. So I don't know about you, but if I lived in Spain and my desayuno was at like 8 a.m. and my lunch was at 2 p.m. and then I had to go all the way again till 8, 9, or 10 p.m. before I could eat dinner, I would be very hungry. So at about 6, Spanish people have what are called tapas. And we've talked about tapas before. Tapas are small antojitos. They are appetizers that tend to be small little bites you can have to hold yourself over. Hello, I see more people joining. Bienvenidos. These tend to be small bites to hold yourself over so that you don't get super, super, super hungry before la cena, before dinner. So this could be aceitunas, it could be olives, it could be almendras, almonds. There's a specific almond called a marcona almond, which is a specific way of roasting almonds that's really traditional to Spain. So nueces, nuts grow very richly in Spain, so do olives, and all of these things make sense, all of these things make sense as what grows in the earth, what grows in la tierra, in the land of el país, and then what is eaten. And it's all under the influencia of the time way, way, way before now. So the Romans who first ruled Spain, and then the Arabs who ruled Spain. So all the flavors are these really mild blend of European flavors and Arabic flavors. And their schedule is desayuno a las 8, merienda a las 2, tapas a las 6, y la cena a las 8, a las 9, o a las 10. Then they go to bed late, and then they wake up and they do it all again. So I want you guys to think to yourself, if you've ever had Spanish food, how it's similar and how it's different to la comida de Mexico. To recap, the protein de España is jamón, and that's because their tierra is really good for raising pigs. They also have tierra that's really good for growing nueces, nuts, and olivas or aceitunas, which are olives. They have land that's good for growing arroz, but it's a specific kind of arroz and it's very small. And they also have land that's good for growing harina, which is pan, which is flour, for pan, for bread. But their biggest thing is aceite, and that is la influencia de los romanos from the Romans and los árabes, the Arabs, who ruled Spain for almost 800 years, which is why the flavors are much more Middle Eastern and Mediterranean than they are any other flavor. Okay, so Spain was a country. They were over here in Europe, chilling. And then some guy, his name was Christopher Columbus. He went to the king and queen of Spain, and he was like, guess what? I think I can make it to India by going west. And the queen of Spain was trying to get rich. And she was so down with this idea that she paid him. She was like, excellent, my guy, get in that boat, sail across, get me to India. But for my niños who are watching, he did not go to India because he didn't realize there was this huge hunk of land in the middle. And that land is El Caribe, the Caribbean, and also Mexico. So we're going to switch gears now, and now we're going to talk about la comida de Mexico. So if you notice, this is an amazing Mexican cookbook that I have that is filled with outstanding traditional Mexican food. Okay, so I told you these two countries have very different histories. Spain was a country. People were living in Europe. The Romans came. The Arabs came. A lot happened that you're going to find out about in 7th grade, and then they became Spain. After they were Spain, they sent Columbus across. He landed. Another one of his homies, Hernan Cortés, got to Mexico, and people had already been there for thousands of years. Okay? So let's think about it. Spain's up here. Mexico's down here. They have very different climates. They have very different geographies. That means their food is different too. Okay? So the food that grows in Mexico has to do with la tierra, with the land. They have a much more humid and hot climate, so they have more tropical foods, and they also have the citrus that we think of when we think about Mexican food, like limon, lime, and they also have tropical fruits like mango and all these other delicious tropical fruits. So that's why the flavors of Mexico are much brighter, and they're different than the mild, salty, rich flavors of Spain. We have the sabores de Mexico. They are picante. Picante means, let me go this way, spicy. Picante, spicy. Ácido. Ácido sounds like acid, and it means acidic or sour. And we have salado. So the people in Mexico also used a lot of salt, and that is going to come back for a story. Mexico is a huge country with a lot of land. So one of their primary sources of proteína is el bife, beef. Okay. They also are able to raise aves, which is poultry. Many of you might not know, when we eat food that is Mexican food aquí en los Estados Unidos, in the United States, we tend to eat pollo, which is chicken. But in Mexico, they actually eat a lot of pavo, which is turkey. And Americans don't really eat turkey other than in Thanksgiving, which is why Mexican restaurants here don't really sell pavo as much. And it's because you sell what the people eat in their country. Traditional Mexican food, other sources of protein include cabra, which is goat, and some various forms. So like my dad has had iguana tacos when he was in Mexico, and that's because one of the things that's available to eat is iguanas. They also, for proteína, have frijoles. Now, notice that I didn't say frijoles are very popular in Spain. They do have beans, but they're the big, like, lima beans. Whereas in Mexico, we know we have frijoles negros, black beans, and frijoles pintos, pinto beans. They also have arroz, and that is because the arroz was brought over from Spain when the Spaniards were controlling Mexico. Okay, and the last thing they have is pimientos or ajis. These are chili peppers, and they grow in Mexico because of that warm tropical climate, and they give Mexican food that traditional spice that we don't find in a lot of other Spanish-speaking countries because their climate and their temperature and their land is so different. So here I have some Mexican spice that I got from a Mexican grocery store. This is annatto seed seasoning, achiote, and you can see it's a red powder. And if you smell it, it smells kind of ácido, it smells kind of sour, and it also smells very picante. And this is a good example of traditional Mexican food. Okay, so the preparations in Mexico are also different. They don't use as much olive oil. For fat, they use mantequilla, butter, or they might use local like corn oil. Maíz, corn, is a huge staple of Mexican food. And what do they use it for? They use it for tortillas. So tacos, enchiladas, memelas, all of the Mexican foods that we know that are made with corn tortillas, these are very traditional, and you'd find them in a cookbook like this because the native people, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, and the Toltecs, had all been making tortillas de maíz, corn tortillas, to eat their food with. So they'd cook up a bunch of protein and maybe some beans, and then much like you might see in Eastern cultures, they would use the tortilla with their hands to pick it up and use it to get it in their mouth instead of getting their hands dirty because they didn't have silverware. Okay, so then as time went on, as they had influencia from Espana and who knew how to make bread, and influencia later from los Estados Unidos, then we got flour tortillas. So things like burritos and chimichangas, which are based out of flour tortillas, they actually aren't traditional Mexican food. They are food that came along much later when Mexico was already in contact with the United States. So a lot of the food that we think of when we think about Mexican food is actually a product of the combination of the United States culture and Mexico's culture. They overlapped in places like California, Arizona, Texas, and the vaqueros, the cowboys who all worked together, the story is that they used that traditional style of food, the tortilla, with the ingredients and the know-how of flour from the European cultures to combine it to make things like burritos and chimichangas. One very special ingredient that is from Mexico, and we get its name in English from Spanish, from Mexican Spanish, from actually the Aztec language that predates Spanish, is avocado. And so if you've ever had guacamole, if you've ever had avocado in any of your Mexican food, you can thank the Aztecs because that was a traditional fruit that was growing from a long, long, long time ago. And they found it and figured out how to turn it into something edible and wonderful and add it to our meals. The other one that we can thank the Aztecs for is chocolate. Chocolate is actually a word that comes directly from the Aztec language, and chocolate grows in these big pods. It's the seed, the inside, and if you scoop it out and roast it, that's what gives it this delicious flavor. The traditional Aztecs and the tribes that lived in ancient Mexico, they turned it into a drink without any sugar, without any sweetener. But the Spaniards who came over, they were presented this drink and they liked it a lot. It was kind of like a ancient hot chocolate, but they added sugar to it, and that's how we get the chocolate that we eat today because of this combination of the European influencia, the Spanish influencia, with the traditions of the Aztecas. All right, niños, that is what I have for you today about the food, the comida de España and de Mexico. You can see that they are very diferentes. They are very different because where these countries are, where these países are in our world, is very different. Mexico has a completely different geography and climate than Spain does over in Europe. However, the two histories of the países, even though they're different, we had the Aztecs here and we had Europeans and Romans and Arabs over here, they collided. And so that's why you get some similarities like the salt, the preparation with rice, and flour tortillas. Tonight, you guys have some homework, and it is to do your own independent research and find a reputable source about the climate and geography of España, el clima y la geografía, and el clima y la geografía de México. And you are to write a little summary in English about these climate and geographies and start thinking critically about the food that we know from these cultures that are united by language, but still muy diferentes. Okay, adios. I will be available for preguntas in our Google Classroom and at my email. Adios, niños.